Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. You have reached the ISMTE office hours around the webinar for new tools in publishing. Today, we'll be talking about the webinar that was held last week around this topic. I'm your host, Chris Heid. During the day, I work as a group product manager at PLOS. I'm also the secretary of ISMTE and the board liaison to the early career committee at the ISMTE, for which I am again the board liaison. They are the sponsors of today's event. This is a very informal discussion of the webinar and topics related to new tools and technology in the publishing and editorial space. So please feel free to turn your cameras on or leave them off, unmute at any point if you have a question or comment. I'm even happy if you chime up while I'm talking. I hope this is a very comfortable, informal, and lively discussion. Again, also please feel free to introduce yourself either verbally or through the chat. If you're not comfortable speaking out in the webinar, please feel free to use the chat to answer questions. My colleague Kevin will be checking the chat regularly for questions. So just to give you a quick background, the webinar, which was entitled New Tools and Innovation in Publishing, again, was held last week. The speakers were Hong Zhu from Wiley's Partner Solutions Group. There he leads the Intelligent Services Group under the Publishings and Platforms division. And they, as a group, design and develop intelligent services to enrich, connect, and discover content and audiences by leveraging AI, big data, and cloud technologies. Our other presenter was Antonella Majur, who is a portfolio manager in the data products division of the American Chemical Society. At the American Chemical Society, she works in the digital transformation group. She spoke on a tool called Side Meetings, which is a poster hosting platform, which they launched during the pandemic, which has become a regular product offering of the American Chemical Society. I found both of these discussions very exciting and interesting when they presented last week. Having been a product manager previously at Scholar One, I've worked closely with both Wiley and the ACS, and great to see that they're doing these initiatives, and really enjoyed these discussions. Did anyone have any specific questions or topics they wanted to bring up for discussion today? One of the things that really interested me was just kind of understanding the process for publishing a poster at a conference. That was not the specific area at Scholar One or something that I've done a lot with. I definitely have worked on one poster in my career. I believe it might have been for an ISMTE event. But that's not, not having come from a scientific background, it's not something that I have done a lot with. Do any of you have experience working with posters? And how would a tool like the tool at the ACS help you in your work?
Chris, I'll just jump in and say that I've never dealt with like publication of posters in my role, so I'm really eager to hear, from if anyone has. So I can't speak from that perspective, but I presented a poster at SSP last year, and like I have the PDF and the PowerPoint file somewhere on a computer in a shared drive. And I have like, a link or a, reference to the proceedings for, my resume, my CV, whatever, ORCID, I don't even know. But where like the idea of it having an ORCID is definitely appealing, because I'm kind of like, what happened to it afterwards? I don't know. I'm not super concerned since, I'm not a researcher. It's not a huge part of like my career path, but it is, work that I did, and having, a more tangible record of it is interesting to me. But I'm really curious what people think in terms like of from the editorial office side, if anyone handles posters.
Yeah, I could imagine, as an undergraduate or a graduate student, having that DOI minted and having a record of your poster that's been, made permanent, and also, potentially, given enhancements online, professional, production value, I think could be really, really valuable. I could see where that would be really, really great.
Hey, hi everyone. I also have not had a background in academics or making posters. I've tangentially helped previous editors make some posters for peer review Congress. I've done posters with ISMTE, but very not much less researcher focused, not very academic. But I agree, Kevin, that right, like I have these old posters from many years ago with ISMT, but I have no idea where they are, honestly. Maybe they're in a physical program somewhere, but they're definitely not searchable. No one could search keywords and find that information. So I also thought that was like a really interesting and great idea. And I have a cousin who's a PhD in biochemistry, and she is a researcher. And so I shared it with her, and she said, that is a really awesome idea, because I don't know numbers on it, but I would assume there's a ton of, we go to these conferences and you see these rooms, there's poster presentations 3 days, and they're different posters all 3 days. And some become published articles, but probably not all. And so but that information was probably still useful and good. So I definitely was really intrigued by their that platform.
Excellent. So Hangzhou from Wiley went over, a number of innovations that they're working on to help editors specifically, but also editorial offices. A few of these included a reviewer recommendation service, which a number of companies offer, either on their own, or say Clarivate's Web of Science reviewer locator, which can be embedded in a number of platforms. The one thing that I found really interesting about the Wiley tool, or the one that he went through, was that it could use a custom list of potential reviewers, or a custom pool based on the society that was using it, as opposed to using a specific database such as Scopus or Web of Science. So that was something that I found really interesting. Generally speaking, though, in your experience, is it hard to get editors to work with new tools? And does anyone have any recommendations for rolling out new editorial office tools, whether they be reviewer recommendation services, or potentially identifiers of fraudulent peer review activity? I know that's becoming really popular, or sort of anything around in that front. The idea of bringing a new tool into the workflow, and how do you sort of get editors to accept that, and then really make it a value add for them. I mean, for me, I think it's a lot of times it's just about really early and clear communication, making sure that they know the limits of the tools, what it can and can't do, and setting clear expectations. I mean, I think in a lot of cases, and like with a lot of things, making sure that people know what to expect coming in is a big part of the battle.
Yeah, I will piggyback off that, Chris. Making sure they know the limits of the tool is like that is probably the summation of my experience with not even new tools that they're familiar with. A lot of the times in my experience, editors have like used especially some of these AI powered or machine learning tools, and they want to know like, what does this mean? And it's like, well, it can't really. One example is just authenticate. They're really familiar with it. They know what it is. They've used it for years, but I still get questions of like, what percentage makes it plagiarism? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's not really the situation. Like there's still very much a human component in between. And I think in the presentation, like there was a slide where it's like, the machine does, I think it was actually on like the image manipulation, but it was like, the machine tells you something, but then human still interprets and like, takes action based on that. And so that's a challenge that like I foresee as more tools become kind of machine powered, of like,
yeah,
hey, we're going to add this tool. It's going to suggest, whether or not there's an issue here, but you still need to go in and confirm, this is just to help you or do an extra flag. And, maybe one day we get to the point where we can just trust it. But for now, like communicating those limitations, I think is really important.
Yeah, that was very, when we were first developing reviewer locator at Scholar One, that was one of the first things we always talked about. It's like the editor or the person at the journal, almost always the editor is selecting the reviewer. Like the machine is not selecting the reviewer. We're not going to automatically send out invitations, both to set expectations for people who wanted it like super easy, and for people who like were maybe a little afraid of the technology. We're like, you still have total control as a human being.
One of the things that we found that works with editors when we're teaching them a new tool is to use Zoom to record instructional videos where we walk through with them and use a real live example, and that seemed to help with our editors for what it's worth.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I could see how that would really be helpful.
I think too with editor buy-in, I remember when I think I attended a workshop, probably an ISMTE workshop on Authenticate, and then I was able to come back to the editors and kind of present, their specific, I don't know if it's data, but all of these other journals are using this. Why are we not using this? Are there any, and I was able to kind of crowdsource that information from the workshop and other industry information and come back to the editors with kind of like that proposal or argument for why we should be using it. Here's the positives, here's the pros for using it, here are the potential limitations and maybe downsides, but these other groups are using this is pretty much I think this is industry standard, or this is best practice, and you have that information from others to back you up, I think can be helpful.
I haven't really worked in an editorial division as such, mostly in production, but that involved a lot of customer success or customer service kind of duties. And I always noticed during that, I don't know, maybe it's a human reaction, but whenever you introduce a new technology or new system, or even your existing ones, and you have new users among your reviewers or editors, it helps to have as I think Laurie suggested, have those kind of video video or some kind of templates or some kind of guidelines very handy, because for communication it's easier, but still people would always expect to have some kind of human touch. Like even when they get back to you, they're like, I mean, the most common phrase I used to come across was, "Oh, I want to speak with a human," or some variations of it. And and then of course I never replied as if yes, I'm a human, but yeah, they needed that assurance. And during that assurance, when you share all these additional resources, it helps, because when you start with a new technology, yeah, it is very crucial to have all these training or educational resources, but it's a kind of continuous process. Like, it's not like, okay, we introduced one technology, it has been 6 months, and now that does not happen. People kind of need consistent support, and in that they kind of appreciate when it is provided by a person. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents from the customer support side.
Absolutely, because I feel like there's a leveraging effect. I mean, there's only so many people you can teach one-on-one in person, but if you make a resource, a strong video that can be shared to tens or hundreds of people, and if those people learn it, they can teach others potentially. So there's just a sort of a multiplier effect when good resources are built out. With respect to the technologies that we discussed and potentially some others, I mean, is there, do you find that in some cases, new technologies that are brought out are in some ways a hindrance, or they aren't quite there? I can remember, back when I was at Scholar One, a lot of people were interested in the extraction service, or the ability to take a PDF or a Word document, the deposited files from the author, and basically just pull out the metadata and fill in the form. And we were going in that direction, and we built something out with the help of a partner, and an editorial manager did the same. And one of the things as we were building out is a lot of potential customers were saying, hey, it has to work really well, because if it doesn't work well, it's just going to cause more work. It's the worst thing in the world. You think the worst thing in the world is to have to fill in all this metadata, but the worst thing in the world is to have to correct all this metadata after it's been put in wrong. So you want to make sure that this is really, really dialed in. Do you have experiences of AI not working out for you, or can you think of cases where another case where a set of tools needs to really work to be beneficial?
I definitely have that experience with the extract of just like, and then the authors aren't checking, and then we have to fix it later. I get the email after, I get the email after they've submitted, and they go, I just looked at my PDF and my title is wrong and my authors are wrong, and can you fix all these things? Like, I mean, they had to like check that they looked at it, or like, at least open the, I think it was like an accordion and look at it, but they didn't actually look at it. And like, I would have just rather that they were typing it in instead of me having to fix it.
We got feedback from our editor-in-chief the other day. We're working with a different, not as common submission system, and we're kind of in the process of kind of building it out and making changes as we go along based on their feedback, which is cool, but also sometimes frustrating. But he made some comment of, I just, with these systems, I just want to get in and get out. I don't want to bother with anything. I don't, I just hate using them, that kind of thing. So it's not all about the systems, but like some of the systems aren't great for the user. For us, we're in it every single day. We're in it all the time. We do all our work in there.
Right.
We know the quirks, we know the workarounds, we know what happens when you press this button, but the reviewer or even the associate editor who's in there a handful of times, even once a week, but like even once a month or less than that, they find these quirks in the system very difficult and they don't want to take the time. They need something that's more user friendly
Right.
to work with. And I don't know, we're all now very set in our ways, I guess, with these systems. So what, that have been in play for 20 some years. So how can we bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. As someone who's in a system, day after day, you definitely learn its ins and outs and its workarounds, and you can kind of forget how hard it can be for someone who hasn't been in that system. I mean, I run into those issues even with modern systems outside of editorial, and I recognize how frustrated that makes me, and I can only imagine what someone must feel if they ran into that. Trying to do an important job, but running up against those difficulties. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and I've talked about this a number of times, is just the need for modern editorial systems to hold up to the same standards that a lot of other systems in other industries are currently doing. The modern sort of e-commerce experience, or the modern, any other type of experience that you have online, that this should be similar. And I know how hard it is to get there, and it's just something that we as a group should be advocating for, and I know that the people building these systems want to get there. So I think that's something we can really hope for in the future.
Something that's definitely a challenge when it comes to especially what Megan was talking about with the user experience, their familiarity, is that these systems have to account for all sorts of unusual behaviors.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, even things like a dropped reviewer in the middle of the review period with like, what does that do to editor timelines and expected turnaround, like warning flags? Like I would have editors say, why does it say I'm late? Like, I'm still working on this. It's like, well, just something weird happened that the system didn't know what to do with, and it thinks you're late. But like, you're not late, so it's fine. But just having a system that can account for all those, or at least handle them in an okay fashion is a really big ask.
I mean, thinking about tools, as a product manager, one of the things that interests me is the build by partner decision. So if you're working with a vendor, whether it be a submission system vendor or another company offering tools, there's no shortage of them in our space. A lot of them doing really great work. How do you kind of make that decision to whether you try to build your own solution to make it a little bit more customized to your exact needs? How do you find an off-the-shelf platform that could meet your needs, or do you partner with somebody to potentially co-develop? These are all options available for organizations of all sizes. The more difficult being the build your own. That is not always an option. But it's just interesting to think about sort of like what goes into that thought process. There's a lot of things to take into account. The size of your organization, how specific or unique are your needs. Are you doing something wildly different from your competitors? If so, is it a benefit? Is it a differentiator that is important to you, or is it maybe an area where you're not as efficient or not doing something as well in an area to potentially change? Are there off-the-shelf solutions that meet your need at a price point that's reasonable for the problem that you're trying to solve? And then are there groups that you would be willing to partner with and potentially co-develop? Is there anyone doing or with expertise in the area that you want to address that could maybe that would be a benefit or a complement to what you're trying to do?
Chris, I put this in the chat, but I'm just curious if you have thoughts. Has kind of the consolidation that we've seen in some of the editorial areas in the past few years kind of changed those options for co-development, or for just from your perspective or from anyone else's? It feels like there are fewer options in the landscape than there were before.
I'll let anyone else chime in. I think consolidation definitely hurts like the number of potential options, but at the same time, there's a lot of new players, coming up all the time. Not just in scholarly publishing, but in every industry, but including scholarly publishing. We're no different in that sense. And I think even within certain universes of solutions, so there are areas to partner. So in some cases you may be working with a specific company, and they may have all sorts of disparate offerings and you can figure out a way to combine them in a specific way that hadn't been thought of before, or hadn't been developed yet. You'd be surprised at how many solutions can exist within the same company and not necessarily be put to the greatest use, and not be sort of paired together as a full offering. So I think even there's opportunities to make improvement. One of the options, or one of the things that Hong discussed last week, was the tools that help detect peer review fraudulent peer review, issues of identity. Do any of you have experience with either the tools he was talking about or other tools in the market, and how have you found those? They're probably one of the relatively newer sort of AI or intelligent tools that have come out. And I'm just curious if anyone has any experience with those.
Remember Elsevier was doing, I think, a similar thing, but I think it was author focused, but I don't remember if it was actually implemented by the time I changed. But I remember give you like confidence, like signposting, red, yellow, green.
Right. Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Some of the similar fields, like institutional email, that kind of thing. Definitely interesting. I'm curious if it's ever like, if there's someone who just happens to look fake, I'm curious if they're going to include a way to like flag, like, no, this is a real person. Like they just happen to trigger all these things.
Yeah, the other thing I found interesting, which is relatively, I guess, new to me and new to the news, but probably not new to some of you, is just this idea of like fake text, like text generated by a computer. I mean, we've heard stories about you know, nonsense manuscripts being submitted, and in some cases even being accepted or published. But I always assumed that like a person wrote it and it was just nonsense, or maybe a computer. But the proliferation and the advancement of tools like Chat GPT is exciting, but also somewhat nerve-wracking, I would assume, for the peer review endeavor. That was one of the topics that Hong discussed. Is they have a tool that will detect whether it is likely that a paper was generated by a machine, which I've heard more about around like with things like essays and term papers and colleges using it. But I could see how that would also be very beneficial in the peer review space. Check the chat real quick. Yeah, and Megan, in the chat, you mentioned paper mills. I know that is a significant issue. They do exist. I have run across them in my career, and I think that you speaking to that was something that didn't really occur to me previously, is that it's not just paper mills and people at these paper mills writing papers and submitting them. Like, you could now just have a machine, it could speed them up and make them even more efficient. So I think there's a danger there for sure, a challenge that needs to be addressed.
I'm curious if anyone had thoughts on kind of the scope check. Actually, let's stay with paper mills for now. Manu in the chat says, what kind of tools are used by the Wiley's research integrity team to detect those paper mill papers? So let's stay with that.
If I remember correctly from the presentation, it sounded like a lot of the paper mill detection centered around finding papers that were generated by machine. I'm sure they have other potential ways to do that across their portfolio, but I don't know if those were shared in the presentation.
Yeah, so I have the slides pulled up. So in the paper mill detection, some of the things they listed were text signals, including things like tortured phrases, which again are some of those AI, artifacts, a non-institutional email, self-citations, similar paper mill papers detection. So I don't know if they have like a database and they're like, this looks like it came from here. Machine generated content, and then the funding statement is labeled, and I can't remember if that was lack of a funding statement or just a weird funding statement.
Yeah, and when I was at ScholarOne, the team built a sort of a peer review integrity check. That's not exactly what we called it, but a peer review health check. And it's never about, finding one specific thing that's like a guaranteed indicator. It's an aggregation of a number of factors that could suggest something is not right. And again, it's very much the same as with the reviewer location service. You still need a person to investigate and to understand and make the final decision. It is essentially impossible for a machine to say, I guarantee, or I know, to the point of being able to spot a person and make a call on the credibility of the paper. A human still needs to be involved, but these are just tools to speed up and to assist in making sure that the process is valid.
And we have Stephanie with the hand up, and then we'll go back to Manu for another question in the chat. Stephanie?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I don't think this was on the webinar, but COPE has recently been putting out things related to paper mills. So if people are looking for more information on that, they have some of the tips are the same, but they have like a list of things to look for, and there's like a webinar. I think it might be available to the public that they had in fall. I can find the link and put it in the chat.
Absolutely. So Manu on the chat asked if Authenticate can detect retracted papers. I do, or paper mill papers. I do not believe so. But there is a Retraction Watch has a database and an API, which I have not used. But you can, Retraction Watch does offer something for retracted papers. I think in a lot of cases, the paper mill papers is a more a function of, does it have these qualities that suggest it was machine generated, and or does it have qualities such as non-institutional email or other qualities that would suggest it was from a paper mill. I don't know if there's like a database of previously found paper mill papers.
Hi, Manu here. Maybe I can add something to this. So I'm at IGC, and I also working for this research integrity, and then we also do get a lot of paper mills, and when we do see like the titles, it looks fishy, non-institutional email, and the ORCID ID, we find that it's non-existing. Sometimes we also check these authors on PubPeers, and then we find that okay, they have several papers maybe which are retracted, or papers where they have issues with the image manipulation, or maybe they used images from other publications. So recently we had a case where one of the paper in the Western blot data was reused from other publication, and authors were not same, institutes were not same, but it was used in 3 different publications. So I don't know if anyone has experienced something like this, that because I think these could be also product of paper mill, because these 3 papers, they were published after like a difference between 2 months or 1 month, but they had used same Western blots. So has anyone experienced something like that, or do you also check like on PubPeer and based on image manipulation, and like how do you at first glance, how do you feel that it could be a suspicious paper?
That's really interesting. I do not have any direct experience with image irregularities or image manipulation, but that's a fascinating. I know that it's an issue. One of the things I've heard is that a lot of times with the detectors of image manipulation, the machine detectors is that it can be hard to weed out the false positives. Like it thinks a lot of things are image manipulations, but they're manipulations that are perfectly within the bounds of ethical paradigms. But again, obviously there are other people who are using this in unacceptable ways. Yeah, I would love to hear more about people's experience with image manipulation. Are there things, or are there any processes your journals have in place to check for this? How are you reacting to the sort of the increase, or the increase, at least the increased visibility or knowledge of image manipulation issues?
So I can tell that at IJC, we are using this image twin software. So we run this software, and which can detect images like if there are duplication within the manuscript. It also can tell you if images are copied from other publications also. But of course, one need to, after getting this final output, one need to cross-check by eye if this is true or not. But in many cases, we do find so that these are true duplications, and then based on that, we are taking further actions, and then that's how we deal. And sometimes when we ask for raw data, in many cases, authors do not want to provide raw data when it's a paper mill product or suspicious paper. Then also we find it fishy that, okay, when there's no raw data available, and when in the presented paper we see there's fabrication, then we can't also accept such manuscripts. So that's how we are dealing with the images currently. So for us, raw data, availability of the raw data is very important to cross-check and decide on anything.
What was the name of that software again?
Image twin.
Okay.
Yes, image twin. I think also Dr. Zhu also presented this tool. I think he presented where they evaluated 3 different softwares. One of them was image twin in one of his slides. So at the moment, this is one of the best tool to detect this image manipulation or fabricated images. So I have one more question regarding to this paper mill. So I think also Dr. Zhu mentioned in his presentation regarding this funding statements. So what kind of these funding statements have you experienced in paper mills, paper or suspicious papers? I mean, I think I maybe I do not have experience in finding such a thing there for funding statement.
I'm not clear on what Dr. Zhu was referring to when he talked about funding statements. He did mention that as being one element that they check to see if it's possible that the paper was from a paper mill, but I don't know what specific indicators within that field they know or have reason to believe are an indication of fraudulent or paper mill activity. I can't recall whether he said or not. I'm thinking it may be the absence of a funding statement, but I don't know why I'm not sure why they wouldn't just put a fake one in. So if they're going to go to the process of doing all that, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Tyra in the chat, continuing on the paper mills, she said that she works for a journal that flags submissions with a number of non-working emails. as a possible indicator, and that they typically return the submission, ask the contact author to update those emails before completing the rest of the submission. So that would be a pretty good way to make sure those are real people.
I know that that's become very common, is for journals and for publishers to be very suspicious of papers with multiple or a number of non-institutional or non-working emails.
Just in my experience, when I was with some previous journals, we had turned on the option that required all authors to, you know, click a link in an email that was generated on submission to verify that they are who they say they are and they're aware of the submission and that sort of thing. And that was a nightmare, just in terms of the number of emails that were legitimately just old and had to be chased down and replaced. The number of institutional filters, especially in medical, you know, hospital settings, and I'm sure universities as well. The ones that not even junk, but just completely blocked by the institution. So eventually, I think we backed it down to, like, we're sending out emails that notify you that you've been listed as a co-author on a submission, but we weren't requiring that they, you know, click a link and confirm. And, you know, while it was a really powerful tool for verifying that everyone was aware, the burden of making it happen was really unrealistic for the number of submissions we had to get through the system.
Yeah, communicating to people via email is quite difficult, especially when you're using these systems that are sending out a lot of email. Making sure that you get through spam filters and you're meeting all of the regulations such as SPF and DChem. All of these things can become issues when trying to communicate. I would love to see at some point some sort of text-based messaging implemented in these cases, but I don't know how far we are off from that.
A lot of those systems.
If you authors would even want that.
Yeah. A lot of the system generated emails look like the junkiest spam mail that have, like, you know, once eventually you get to like rich text, like it's not as bad, but like some of the basics from the system just looked like, you know, someone was wiring me money from my deceased granduncle across the world. So.
Right. Yep. Send me money and I'll send you back 3 times as much. Yeah.
Rashali in the chat says that one would think incorporating funding or funding institution metadata in the submission would help with verifying the funding information for a possible paper mill or for detecting possible paper mill submissions. On the other hand, it makes the submission process more laborious for authors, and it's tricky to strike that balance. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect most publishers these days to require some sort of funding statement, even if it's just to say I don't have funding. But again, yeah, I wish I knew how they were using the funding statement to determine affiliation with paper mill. Absolutely.
As a reminder, we can go back and watch the webinar again.
We
It's
can.
still up.
Yes,
I will do that afterwards. And if you are an ISMTE member, you can go to the early career discussion forum where we have a thread about this webinar and this event. And I'm going to put the link that Stephanie shared from COPE in there. And I will answer this question about what he said about the funding statements. So that answer will be there.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Another thing that caught my attention or made me think about when Dr. Zhu was presenting is he showed a lot of tools, but I was unclear as to how many of these tools were present within their their system, whatever they're currently using, and how many were outside of their peer review system or their other editorial systems. And like some of the challenges people have working in multiple systems, or how much and to what extent is the value of a tool degraded by having to use it, say, outside of your submission management system, or having to go to another tool to find a set of reviewers, as opposed to just being able to click them in the interface that you're currently using. Like is that an issue? Do you run into issues when editors are asked, or editorial staff are asked to use multiple systems to accomplish a task?
I mean, I think that is difficult because using multiple systems or having to take things outside the editorial system would be less efficient, which I think would be difficult, as we've discussed among ISMT groups a lot. There's constantly more and more work, and you don't get additional staff or time. So that always, I don't want to be the like, no, we can't do this, but it's the second I hear about, oh, we need to add this, or we need to make sure we're checking for that, that is a little bit of a, and not a red flag, but just like, oh, here's another something we're going to have to add in, find a process for. How can we make it efficient? How can we not, is there something we can drop doing? So I think it's how can we figure out which tools have the longevity to stay around, like something like Authenticate that is now widely used, that we want to invest our time or money or training into. We want to invest teaching our editors how to use it, integrating it into the editorial system, and then how do we make sure it's like a long-term solution versus just something that's like a overnight sensation that seems really cool on the surface, but might fade away afterward. So I think that's, I don't know, there's just a lot of things to consider with those kind of things when we talk about adding these types of different tools in.
One thing that it was good software, and I cannot remember the name of it. If someone, like, it's common, just having a blank, but it was uniform disclosure software. I think it's from the AAPM. Convey. I was like, I know it's.
Convey. I was going to say, what kind of
Thank you.
Yeah. No,
oh my
Convey.
gosh.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Convey. And this was a couple jobs ago, so I don't know how much it's changed since then. But we had a demo, and the software looked, good. Looked like it would solve some problems, but they told us all of our users would need to have an account with AAPM that was separate from their submission system. It wasn't going to be API passed through into our submission system. We're like, okay, so that's a no. We cannot get all of our users to sign up for another thing that will have a separate password that they will never remember, and they will try and log in with the same things. That was a barrier that was just insurmountable for, but it was really good, a really good tool that looked like it would solve a lot of problems. So, I'm not sure if they've found more ways to integrate now, but
we actually did adopt Convey. We were one of the first people to use it for journals. And I'll be honest, we had significant issues with it because it wasn't set up in a way that's really applicable to collecting disclosures from authors for articles. So what we ran into with that was, yes, in addition to the accounts, they were sending out emails to every author to supply disclosure forms, to set up an account and submit that. But there were lots of just little things that they hadn't considered up until that point that would make it work appropriately for journals. For example, there was no stop to the emails. So if authors never submitted their disclosures, they would get them for the rest of their lives, just, you know, weekly reminders for the rest of their lives, like things like that. We also realized that we couldn't have separate accounts or forms for different things. So the forms had to be too generalized, so we weren't able to use it for other things in our society along with the journal. So it sounds like a great concept in theory, but I don't think there's anyone out there right now who's figured out a way to make it work appropriately for journals that would actually decrease workload or streamline it. So we actually have ended up stopping using Convey, and, you know, said that, you know, we'd look into it again in the future if they could figure out a way to make it work for journals. So that was just our experience.
Were you using it integrated into like Editorial Manager or
Yeah,
another
so
system?
it does integrate into Editorial Manager. But I think that we were the first people to test it or try it, and we just kept running into issue after issue. And then they're just small things. You know, we talked about this before, how there are little things that come up. I think, Kevin, you were saying that at the beginning of this call, like there are little things that come up here and there, and just people aren't prepared for them because, you know, it might not have ever come up before. And so that's what we were running into a lot with this software.
But it sounds like a lot of those, or some of those issues at least, were issues with the Convey software and not with the integration into Editorial Manager.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of both, because we also ran into some things where when they were integrating it into EM, it didn't occur to them that they needed a way to deal with, you know, this issue, or you know, that we needed to have you know, it's set up this certain way, you know, or need to be triggered at this time, you know, so there were like little things like that. So I think that just things that they needed to figure out to make it work well with journals, and they probably are working on it with EM now.
I'm sure they are. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes when you're an early adopter, you run into things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's good to be on the cutting edge.
It is, until it doesn't work and creates chaos, and then you have to abandon the ship.
Yeah.
Like, we have to stop this, turn it off.
Awesome. It looks like we are at time. It is just 1 minute to noon Eastern time. I would like to thank all of you for joining. This has been a really great discussion. Again, please, if you are interested in volunteering at the ISMTE, we have lots of opportunities to volunteer, both on the early career committee, the marketing committee, the website committee, which I lead. There's no shortage of opportunities and ways to contribute. It can be something, you know, you can contribute something related to your profession, or if you just want to learn a new skill or do something, there are no shortage of ways to contribute. So if you're interested, please reach out. And again, we will, you know, information will be available on the discussion board. So please check out the comments and the email that you received to keep the discussion going.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Have a great day.